30 seconds and counting. Astronauts report it feels good. T-minus 25 seconds. 20 seconds and counting. T-minus 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9. We have ignition sequence start. The engines are on. 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. We have commit. We have liftoff. Liftoff at 7:51 a.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Within a million years, all life will have vanished from the surface of the globe. When the solar system dies and the sun consumes the Earth, man will have left behind the world where he evolved to colonize new planets around other suns. It is an expression of man's boldest dream, and the reason why his bravest goal has been to reach out among the stars. To mobilize this ambition, ideas gave way to imagination, and the moon provided expression to a new dream of flight into space. Nearly 2,000 years ago, men sailed to the moon in a boat. But by 1902, science had replaced fantasy. At the beginning of this century, a Russian schoolteacher, Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, showed how men would colonize space. His books became Bibles for amateur cosmonauts, filled with theories still valid today. Devised for carrying people to colonies in orbit, his blueprint shaped models of spaceships to come. In 1926, 20 years after Tsiolkovsky, America's Robert Goddard built the first liquid-fueled motor. A better engine for space than solid rockets like Chinese firecrackers, because it could be more precisely controlled. Germany's Baltic research base at Peenemünde gave engineer Werner von Braun the means to build the world's first liquid-fueled missile, the V2. It emerged from work totally separate to Goddard's experiments and would blast cities in England on orders from Hitler. But success was an elusive factor in the gameplay of the rocket's genesis. From this top-secret launching site, missiles flew erratically, and sometimes not at all. Finally, in the closing months of World War II, more than 3,000 missiles were fired successfully, almost half that number targeted on London. The age of the ballistic missile had arrived. Von Braun had been the V-2's chief architect, the man who sold it to Hitler. Now victory gave Americans the valued prize, and 100 missiles were shipped west from under the noses of Russian guards in the eastern occupied zone. Back home with their spoils of war, and 120 of the German rocket engineers, the Americans reassembled V-2s and put their own tiny rocket on top for high-altitude shots from a site in New Mexico. It was a proving ground for the machine and the men. Von Braun urged a drive for large-scale rockets and built missiles for the army as a route for getting the real tools for space travel. In short time, he put forward an astonishing proposal. Take proven Jupiter and Redstone missiles, successors to the primitive V-2, and bolt them in a cluster. Together, they would lift weights heavier than any single rocket could carry. It promised shortcuts to quick success, putting America ahead of Russia. Called Saturn I, the rocket was a bold idea. Already suspicious of what the Russians might do, the initiative coincided with President Eisenhower's plan to put an American satellite in orbit. And when he came to review von Braun's inventive proposal, the German engineer proved a convincing salesman. The project became a national goal. Meanwhile, in response to American plans, Russia began a satellite project of its own. Called Sputnik, it was the world's first space capsule. Galvanized by the electrifying success of this bleeping ball, the two nations were propelled into a headlong race, with no prize for second place. Reacting to the Soviet challenge, America's space agency, NASA, was hurriedly formed to beat Russian plans for a man in orbit. Others, like Scott Crossfield, were working to match rocket engines and aeroplanes in the race for national fame. Forged in the fires of aeronautical accomplishment, the test pilots paved the way. In a rocket ship called X-15, Crossfield and his fellow pilots touched the edge of space. Behind this man was a team to challenge the idea that rocket planes would give way to spacecraft. Despite their efforts, they were replaced. Three months after Sputnik, and as America's first satellite, the minute Explorer 1 was prepared for launch into space. Its purpose? to discover the shape of Earth's radiation belts, protecting the planet from cosmic particles. Racing to maintain its lead, Russia surged along the road to a man in space with tests on dogs, which proved animals could withstand stresses of acceleration. Man's best friend became the pioneer for Soviet cosmonauts in space. Laika was to be the first dog in orbit, riding on the second Soviet satellite before America launched Explorer 1. Russia's lead was stretching, and the fight for international prestige became a global chess game as Soviet pride roared with Laika into the blackness of space. Laika had been launched on a one-way ticket to extinction. Within a week, the dog was dead. Emotions crashed headlong on the mission of this first burnt offering in orbit. In contrast, the gentler notion of a faithful dog with man in space had been foreseen much earlier by H.G. Wells. But there were still many unknowns about orbital flight, and tests in an aeroplane simulating the lack of gravity showed the Russians what to expect. Nothing behaved the way it would on Earth, and new dimensions to science teased the imagination and sharpened expectations of what the first man in space would feel. Enticing shifts in the laws of physics beckoned seductively, experienced for only a few seconds in the parabolic curve of a high-flying aeroplane. Cosmonauts would have no room in their capsules for moving with the freedom they enjoyed in aeroplane simulations, but the day would come when space stations liberated them from cramped modules. Few real problems for men in space appeared in airborne tests, but with unique physical differences, women might suffer adverse reactions. Nothing showed up. In fact, they were more at ease than men. Ejection seats would be the only means of getting away from an explosion on the way up, but escape would bring a rough ride, perhaps broken bones. Tests from high-flying aeroplanes rehearsed escape from a tumbling spacecraft, unable to deploy its parachutes. There were no limits to the variety of training which eliminated aspiring cosmonauts. One man, Yuri Gagarin, stood out above the rest. Selected to be the first man in space, Gagarin was not the only cosmonaut to have the right stuff, but he led the group. In constant preparation to fly their Mercury capsules in space, another group in America trained in much the same way as their Soviet counterparts. Of them, John Glenn was chosen to be the first US astronaut in orbit. American astronauts trained repeatedly to fly their capsules, special machines giving them a taste for what life would be like in a tumbling spacecraft. The centrifuge built up their resistance to acceleration, but it was in handling potential problems aboard an orbiting capsule that best used the piloting skills acquired through their years of flying. Here they learned to delicately control their spacecraft. The spacesuit served as lifesaver if pressure inside the capsule got dangerously low or a meteorite were to puncture the skin. Because American astronauts landed on water, special precautions were taken, allowing the pilot to crawl out of the top of a sinking capsule and escape to a life raft. It was very different to flying an aeroplane, but the essential skills were similar. Weightlessness was equally important for US astronauts to experience sensations of orbital flight. Their training mirrored simulations by a rival group of men and women 6,000 miles away in Russia. And like their counterparts building Mercury capsules, Russian engineers built a production line of Vostoks for tests, checks, and flight. It was a start of intensive design and engineering, with improvements and fine-tuning. To qualify the whole system, capsules with dummy occupants were put in orbit and returned to Earth. On On one, a recording of a Russian choir stood in for the missing cosmonaut to confuse the Americans. It did. Suits were as important as spacecraft for ensuring the safety of US astronauts, and test after test measured each garment for leaking oxygen or worn joints. Special bags for Mercury capsules landing at sea helped cushion the impact and keep the spacecraft intact. But not everything always worked to plan.
We have main engine ignition.
Outside Moscow, at the home of Soviet spacemen, efforts reached a peak as cosmonaut training intensified. Endless time was spent in the classroom. And for Yuri Gagarin, it had a special purpose. Would he be the first to orbit the Earth? An American might get there before him, but the odds seemed to be on the Russian. The massive rocket used to launch Vostok flights was an adapted version of the world's first intercontinental missile, similar to that used for Sputnik 3.5 years earlier. April 1961, and the world's first spaceman was dressed for liftoff. His rocket groomed by engineers who for days had been preparing systems and equipment that would carry him into space. At the launch pad, the giant rocket was fueled to blaze new pages in the history books of Earth, a destiny foretold by Tsiolkovsky more than 50 years before. In the control center, Korolev, the father of the Vostok program, watched and waited. The news was electric. It charged the world with amazement, admiration, and envy, unleashing pent-up aspirations about man's destiny in space. Around the world, a new peak of expectation followed Gagarin into space. And for a while, the global village paid homage to the world's first cosmic ambassador. On a stone ledge above Red Square, Russian politicians seized the event and put Gagarin's epic achievements into the vanguard of Soviet propaganda. Around the world, people saluted the spaceman with a common feeling of pride, united in praise and respect for new and unexpected accomplishments by a nation so recently devastated in the war against Nazi aggression. For 16 years since 1945, countries around the globe established their faith in a community of nations. Gagarin kindled hope that space might be the catalyst for a better future, built upon the common bond of people everywhere. This message was greater than the politics of party or ideology. While Russia sent her cosmonaut around the world, America put a chimpanzee or two into orbit. Ham and Sam got wide publicity for their pioneering duties, but drew cynical comparisons from American politicians concerned at the flagging NASA program. The American chimpanauts performed well and proved Mercury would carry astronauts for several orbits of the Earth. Finally, a month after Gagarin's single orbit, America was ready for its first manned flight. It would be only a 15-minute ballistic shot, straight up and down, but the chosen astronaut, Alan Shepard, would be in space for several minutes and prove the tiny capsule could work with a human occupant. The date? May 5, 1961.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Roger, liftoff and the clock has started. Yes, sir, reading you loud and clear. This is Freedom 7. The fuel is go, 1.2 G. Cabin at 14 PSI. Oxygen is go.
Less than 16 minutes after launch, Shepard was safely back, clearing the way for John F. Kennedy, President of the United States, to make the most amazing announcement of the century.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
It was to be the greatest race of all time. And as the race accelerated, another Russian, German Titov, thundered into space on the second Soviet mission. Titov ejected from his capsule on the way down. Without the safety of a water landing, Vostok was likely to give the occupant a nasty jolt on touchdown. But the ejection seat was a backup denied to Mercury pilots. In America, John Glenn was fitted for his body-molded contour couch, the one he would lie on for NASA's first manned orbital flight 10 months after Gagarin. On fiery descent through the atmosphere, the Mercury pilot would be crushed by a force 7 times his own body weight as the tiny capsule decelerated. The contour couch would save the man from broken bones if things got rough. Protected from the worst effect of a rolling spacecraft, the seat would help keep the astronaut in place. It would prevent a sudden lurch to left or right, which could prove disastrous if he accidentally bumped against an unguarded switch. This was the big one for America. Everything depended on Glenn's flight. The man was ready. It was time to fly. 3,000 miles and nearly 5 hours later, Glenn was back, having proved beyond doubt that US spacemen were cutting into the lead held by Russia. More than 10 months behind in the race to put a man in orbit, at last the Kennedy challenge posed a real threat to Soviet ambition. Celebrating in the way they knew best, Americans felt the pride of matching Soviet accomplishments, and inspired by national resolve, they entered the contest with vigor, electrified by the promise of outstanding events to come. After Glenn's mission, 3 more Mercury capsules were flown on longer flights, preparing astronauts for 3-man Apollo missions. Cooper flew the last Mercury mission in May '63 for a duration of more than 34 hours. But only 1 month later, the Russians dramatically increased their lead when they rocketed the first woman into space. Valentina Tereshkova prepared herself to fly aboard the last Vostok mission on June 16, 1963. The Russians were at a turning point. They had not foreseen the challenge set by Kennedy, where once they sought to show Soviet capabilities through innovative feats in orbit, they now found themselves locked in the race for the moon. Although by now manned flight seemed almost commonplace, Tereshkova's mission was unique and attracted tremendous public interest. 2 Vostoks had been in orbit at the same time. The second capsule, carrying Bykovsky, passed within 3 miles of Tereshkova before landing. As Valentina returned, she was met by cosmonaut Nikolaev, who later became her husband and the father of her children. But a larger group of cosmonauts were in training, and new spacecraft were being built. Alexei Leonov was the man selected to leave his capsule in space, man separated from machine in symbolic preparation for walking on the surface of another world. But the training went on, and daily exercise was a routine part of cosmonaut life, an everyday chore regardless of the schedule. In efforts to recreate the weightless conditions of space, Soviet cosmonauts used large water tanks to simulate the lack of gravity. It was a valuable guide for later spacewalks when Russian spacecraft provided ample opportunity for work outside the capsule. Training was an asset, but it always paid to chat with the man who had been there before. In March '65, nearly 4 years after Gagarin's historic flight, Belyayev and Leonov got ready to achieve another first for Russia. From his spacecraft 300 miles up, Leonov was to float at the end of a 16-foot tether. It was to be the first time a spacesuit was required to guarantee an astronaut's life, and it wasn't about to fail. Russia had stolen another lead, but not for 2 more years did a cosmonaut fly in space. In that vital period, the initiative switched to America, where it remained for 10 years. Meanwhile, the Russians pressed on with a spacecraft called Soyuz, originally designed to fly 2 men around the moon. A new group of astronauts was picked to fly the 2-man Gemini, devised to rehearse complex space operations around Earth before Apollo was ready. Spacewalking, rendezvous and docking, long-duration flight. Gemini was a testing ground for new and exotic techniques essential to the prime task of getting men on the moon. As a training tool, it was a glittering success. It was the most successful period so far, when American spacemen outpaced every Soviet achievement to date. Aboard the first, Virgil Grissom, veteran of an early Mercury shot, and John Young. Grissom would die in an Apollo fire 22 months later, while Young would fly another Gemini, 2 Apollos, and at least 2 shuttle missions. Their rocket, a mighty Titan missile.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Roger, pitch. You're on your way, Molly Brown. Yeah, man.
3 months after Grissom and Young's triumphant return to Earth, White trained for a spacewalk across America. Now it was McDivitt and White's turn to ride the Titan into orbit, June 3, 1965. Their mission? To stay in orbit 4 days and to make Ed White NASA's first spacewalker.
I'm under my own control.
Gemini tested new techniques and simulators rehearsed moon landings for Apollo. Neil Armstrong was already in practice, maneuvering a descending capsule. Armstrong flew the first Gemini rendezvous and docking mission in March '66, a flight that came close to catastrophe. First, an Atlas put the Agena docking target into space. Then Armstrong and Scott were launched aboard Gemini to pursue Agena and dock with it. Rendezvous and docking was vital for later Apollo missions, where a lunar module lifting off the moon would have to fly out to the orbiting mothership or remain on the surface forever. So the first docking test with Gemini 8 in Earth orbit was a key part of all future moon missions. Manned capsules had rendezvoused in orbit before, but none had achieved physical contact. There were many potential problems. What would happen when two capsules touched? Would static electricity ignite fuel in a massive explosion? There was only one way to find out. Perform a docking and see.
Okay, we're going to cycle our stop arm switch.
27 minutes after the link-up with its Agena, Gemini was in deep trouble. In their tumbling and gyrating capsule, Scott and Armstrong were close to blackout. Spinning at nearly 1 revolution a second, they wrestled with the controls, undocked from Agena and steadied Gemini. The mission had to end, and two badly shaken astronauts readied themselves for the return to Earth. Cutting short a flight planned to last several days, they splashed down in the Pacific after only 10 hours in space. In the months ahead, Gemini did complete several dockings and went on to accomplish all the techniques it was designed to practice. A dazzling succession of 10 flights in 20 months. On January 27, 1967, a flash fire at Cape Canaveral wiped out 3 U.S. astronauts. A stunned nation mourned in disbelief. The events of a moment extinguished forever the comfortable notion that spaceflight was a happy-go-lucky adventure. It was to have been the first flight on a Saturn I, an Apollo mission with astronauts Grissom, White, and Chaffee. During a launch pad rehearsal, the capsule became a coffin in the raging fire no one could put out. Within seconds, the 3 men were dead. In words that stung like steel-tipped arrows, the review board spoke of wires meshed like a rat's nest, of piping badly brazed, and numerous electrical shorts. In the highly flammable environment of a pure oxygen atmosphere, the spacecraft was a bomb. Redesigned, there would never again be the same risk of fire, but other specters lurked, and at least one moon-bound Apollo came very close to disaster. In the 20 months between the fire and the first flight of Apollo, numerous adjustments were made, but the greatest lesson of all was pinned up in every space factory across America. Shoddy work costs lives. Schirra, Iserly, and Cunningham were picked to fly the new Apollo. Same outside, but very different on the interior. Where once the capsule burned like a torch, it now would not even sustain a fire deliberately lit.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, we have ignition. Commit liftoff. We have liftoff. This is launch control. We have cleared the tower.
Roger, tower clear. 12 seconds down the roll. Program has Recovery 1 has positive contact, and now we've got a...
The epic flight of NASA's three-man capsule had put America's astronauts back in orbit for the first time in nearly 2 years. In 7 spectacular days, Apollo 7 was a 101% success, according to program director Sam Phillips. The days of recrimination were over, and it was time to get on with the job. Designed to leave Earth orbit, Apollo 8 was to send men beyond the shackles of Earth's gravity for the first time in history.
15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9. We have ignition sequence start. The engines are on. 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. We have commit. We have liftoff. Liftoff at 7:51 a.m. Eastern Standard Time.
The distinctive feature of the Apollo 8 mission came at the end of the second orbit. Ground controllers gave a go to reignite the third stage engine and head for the moon. Increasing speed to a phenomenal 25,000 miles per hour, Apollo 8 was on a 3-day flight to a close encounter with another world in space. Translunar injection, TLI, was about to take place.
About 10 miles downrange.
Apollo 8, Houston. Go ahead, Houston. Apollo 8, you are go for TLI, over. Roger, understand. We're go for TLI. Apollo 8 coming up on 20 seconds to ignition. Mark it, and you're looking very good. Roger.
Transmission is coming to you approximately halfway between the moon and the Earth. We've been 31 hours, about 20 minutes into flight. We have about less than 40 hours left to go to the moon.
Apollo 8 Houston, 1 minute to LOS, all systems go. All right, now you're going. Command reset, tape recorder forward, low bit rate. Roger, safe journey, guys.
We've got it. Apollo 8 now in lunar orbit.
It's now approaching lunar sunrise, and for all the people back on Earth, the crew of Apollo 8 has a message that we would like to send to you. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness.
They had done it. In 1968, Apollo's second flight carried 3 men 250,000 miles to the moon, orbited the crusty surface only 60 miles above the craters and the rocks, and returned to a hero's welcome. Borman, Lovell, and Anders, 3 men from the moon. Unbelievably, very little now seemed to stand in the way of a lunar landing in 1969. The Christmas trip of Apollo 8 had proved that. For the 300,000 people around the world who had played a part in America's space program, the final countdown had already begun.
3, 2, 1, start. Okay, you're free. I'm free? Roger.
Yet even now, no one had yet tested the spacecraft built to land on the moon. With spindly legs, a fragile skin, and 500,000 parts, the lunar module would alone take men to the surface far below. A machine so incredibly delicate, it could not support its weight on Earth. A machine with 2 electronic brains, one to check the other. A machine that, once launched, could never itself return to Earth. The only way back would be in Apollo, built to return 3 men and moon rock. 9 weeks after Apollo 8, a 10-ton lunar module called Spider got a workout in Earth orbit, sending 2 men nearly 300 miles from the mothership on the first rehearsal for a moon landing. If they failed to rendezvous with Apollo, the crew would have perished in space. After Apollo 9, John Young took Mission 10 and a lunar module called Snoopy to within 9 miles of the moon, the last trial for the big event. Denied fuel to actually land, they paved the way for Apollo 11. For Apollo 11, Neil Armstrong to land on the moon, the command module pilot Mike Collins to stay aboard Apollo, Buzz Aldrin to fly down with Armstrong.
Astronauts report it feels good. T-minus 25 seconds. 20 seconds and counting. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence starts. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
Roger, we got a roll from
Tower clear.
Roger, roll. different from dry.
Roger, 11, we'll pass that on, and it semi looks like you're well on your way now. Apollo 11, this is Houston, over.
Roger, go ahead, Houston, Apollo 11.
11, this is Houston, you are go for LOI, over.
Roger, go for LOI.
Roger, Eagle, that's right.
Roger, how does it look?
Eagle has wings.
Roger.
Looking good.
Roger, Neil, we got if you give us cooling data, we got the loads for you. Eagle, Houston, we rigging out your go for PDI, over. Roger, that's it.
Lights on. Zero.
This is 10%.
That's 20 seconds, everything looking good. We show altitude about 47,000 feet.
75. 75 feet. That's looking good. Down a half. 6 forward. 60 seconds. Lights on. 6. Down 2.5. Forward. Forward. 40 feet down 2.5. Picking up some dust. 30 feet, 2.5 down. Straight shadow. 4 forward. 4 forward. Drift into the right a little. 6. Down a half. 30 seconds. Forward. The 13 is in. We copy you down, Eagle.
Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
Okay, Neil, we can see you coming down the line now.
Okay, I just checked. Getting back up. That's one small step for man. One giant leap for mankind.
Became indeed for all mankind.
Some said this was the greatest day since creation.
That's one small step for man. One giant leap for mankind. Apollo 11, Houston, how did it go, over? Open up the LRL doors, Charlie. Roger, we got you coming home.
July 1969. Apollo 11 had carried 2 men to the surface of the moon. They had seen the Earth from the dusty landscape of an alien world, and now they were going home. It had been the greatest day in the history of human endeavor, but it could have been the last if foreign microbes from the barren moon invaded our planet. So for a while, Armstrong, Collins, and Aldrin would be quarantined in a special laboratory at Houston. and taken there in a metal box, a coffin if the skeptics were right.
This is the greatest week in the history of the world since the creation, because as a result of what you've done, the world's never been closer together before. And we just thank you for that, and I only hope that as a result of what you've done, we can do our job a little better. We can reach for the stars just as you have reached so far from the stars. We don't want to hold you any longer.
The Russians followed American progress, eager to see what surprises the moon held. In 1966, they had placed Luna 9 on the surface, and later versions carried experiments for testing the bearing strength of the soil. The pictures sent back were a prelude to more ambitious projects, where soil samples would be brought to Earth in tiny capsules across 250,000 miles of space. When recovered, they provided important information about the moon from sites very different to places men explored in Apollo landing modules. To roam across the barren surface and send back television pictures along the way, Russian engineers designed a very remote-controlled vehicle for moving long distances and exploring the rocky valleys. Driven by electric motors and chain tracks, it would be operated from Earth, picking a route through the boulders and blocks. Finally, they got it right, and Lunokhod emerged as the first moon car. Driven down ramps deployed after landing, Lunokhod was built for rugged work on a rocky world. There would be no mechanic just around the bend, no hand to tighten loose bolts. Lunokhod was placed in a special chamber to simulate the airless moon, where oil would alternately freeze and boil, and lubricants act like glue. Luna 17 carried Lunokhod piggyback to the moon. From Earth went the command to start rolling. Safely down, the solar panel was opened, and Mission Control gave the order to drive off. In America, 4 months after the first landing, it was the turn of Apollo 12.
8, ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engines running, commit, liftoff. We have liftoff, 11:22 a.m. Eastern Standard Time.
That's a lovely liftoff. That's not bad at all. We now have problems here. I don't know what happened.
What happened was a lightning bolt in a storm-filled sky sent lights flashing and hearts pounding. It could have been a mission abort.
Apollo 12, Houston.
Hello, Houston. Yankee Clipper with Intrepid in tow has arrived on time.
The landing module was to prove it could make a pinpoint touchdown by flying past Surveyor 3, a robot fired to the moon 3.5 years before.
Coming down at 2 feet. You got plenty of gas, dude. Hang in there.
30 seconds.
18 feet, coming down at 2. Watch for the dust. He's got it made. Come on in there. 24 feet. Contact light.
Roger, copy contact.
Outstanding, man. Beautiful. He's got it up.
Come back up the ladder a notch. Man, that may have been a small one for Neil, but that's a long one for me.
Holy man, it's beautiful out here. It sure is. It's something else. I'll tell you, I think we're in a place that's a lot dustier than Neil's.
Surface is fine and powdery. I can...
Set to watch the moonwalk on TV, controllers were frustrated when the solar rays destroyed the camera. But Surveyor got a visit from 2 moonwalkers who snipped off pieces to bring home. A package of instruments laid across the dusty surface would enable scientists on Earth to take the moon's pulse, look for signs of activity deep inside, or sample the belts of radiation streaming from the sun. On Apollo 13, Commander Jim Lovell would head the third landing attempt to a place named Fra Mauro, while rookie pilot Fred Hayes rode along. It was Jack Swiggert's role to stay in moon orbit.
10, 9, 8. Ignition sequence has started. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. We have commit and we have liftoff at 2:13. Then it has cleared the tower.
This is the crew of Apollo 13. Wish everybody there a pleasant evening at Odyssey. Good night.
Thank you, 13. Hey, Houston, we've had a problem here.
Say again, please. Houston, we've had a problem.
Stand by, 13. We're looking at it. We had a pretty large bank associated with the caution and warning now.
180,000 miles from Earth and still headed for the moon, Apollo 13 was a crippled derelict in space. A sudden explosion deep inside the equipment section drained the spacecraft of electrical power. Living up to its number, 13 was a doomed flight unless the astronauts used the lunar module for power and oxygen. Serving as a lifeboat, it would have to keep them alive all the way around the moon and back to Earth, the only way home.
A couple ratings for us. We'd like the nitrogen pressure on fuel cell 1. We need the oxygen pressure on fuel cell 2.
Clutching onto life, the astronauts built makeshift filter boxes for lunar module Aquarius to clean the air of carbon dioxide breathed out by the crew. Without these, Lovell, Hayes and Swiggert would be slowly poisoned to death. With temperatures near freezing, they held on.
Says zip.
But of all the equipment on board, the most important were the little filter boxes adapted by the crew themselves. Time now to jettison the equipment section. What they saw sent shivers through the capsule.
You can jettison the service module when you're ready. No big rush, but anytime.
And there's one whole side of that spacecraft missing. Right by the high gate antenna, the whole panel is blown out, almost from the...
Now the Apollo capsule could be powered up. Lifeboat Aquarius had done its job, but only the command module could safely re-enter Earth's atmosphere.
Okay, your go to start powering up the command module.
Right-o, we're starting now.
Okay.
Houston, we'll punch off at 141 plus 30.
Okay, Jack, we copy and we concur. Odyssey, Houston, we can give you a go if you'll put the logic on momentarily for us.
Okay, the 6 logic is on.
Okay, just copy that and you are go for fire alarm.
Real fire.
It's been 2 minutes now from time of drogue deployment.
We're looking at the weather on TV and it looks just as advertised, real good.
Odyssey, Houston, we show you on the mains. It really looks great.
An extremely loud applause as Apollo 13 on the main chute.
From the start, the exploration of space has been a hazardous venture. The voyage of Apollo 13 dramatized its risk. The men of Apollo 13, by their poise and skill under the most intense kind of pressure, epitomized the character that accepts danger and surmounts it. Theirs is the spirit that built America.
The crew of Apollo 14 were to return to the moon and attempt a landing at the site first chosen for its jinxed predecessor. Modifications would ensure they succeeded.
Ignition sequence start. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Launch commit. Liftoff. We have liftoff. On Apollo 14. 3 minutes past the hour. The tower is clear.
I do. You have good thrust and all Friday.
Roger, there's 413 plus 10,000. Okay, Al, beautiful. We can see you coming down the ladder right now. It looks like you're about on the bottom step and on the surface. That's Bedford, old man. Okay, you're right. Al is on the surface, and it's been a long way, but we're here. And the
Aged 47, Alan Shepard was the oldest man to reach the moon. With Ed Mitchell, he pulled a handcart up the rocky slopes of Cone Crater. They'd come to sample the boulders at the rim and needed frequent stops to cool down and get their breath. Back at the lunar module, Shepard tried a mid-iron shot with a makeshift golf club.
I have a little white pellet that's familiar to millions of Americans. Drop it down. Unfortunately, the suit is so stiff I can't do this with two hands, but I'm going to try a little sand trap shot here.
That looked like a slice to me, Al.
There we go.
When Apollo 14 returned to lay the spectre of 13, it saved the remainder of the moon program. Money was needed for other space projects. Popular opinion frowned on repeated flights to the moon. But there would be 3 more lunar trips made with improved spacecraft capable of staying 3 days and carrying electrical moon cars. It was July '71. Apollo 15 was ready.
9, 8, ignition sequence start. Engines on. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All engines running. Launch commit. Liftoff. We have liftoff at 9:34 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time.
Lunar Module Falcon flew a perilous descent to a valley flanked by hills, an impossible mission without the precision guidance of Apollo 12 nearly 2 years before.
15 Houston, the centering on the picture is good now, and we're getting an excellent quality picture.
Very good. Good. This is really a rock and rolling ride, isn't it? Never been on a ride like this before. Oh, boy. I'm glad they got this great suspension system on this thing.
In mission control, Ed Fendel operated the camera, while Scott and Irwin kicked boulders around for all the world to see.
That's just super. It's, unreal.
But not everyone always watched where they were going.
Oh, dadgummit.
Having a few problems.
I can see the base of the front.
The serious business of moon science stretched Apollo to the limit. With longer spacewalks and better tools, they drilled for core samples, plugged the surface with thermometers, and, for children on Earth, demonstrated a hammer and a feather hitting the ground simultaneously, proving that Galileo was right about airless space.
Hopefully, they'll hit the ground at the same time. How about that? Mr. Galileo was correct in his findings. Dave, I'm reminded of a favorite biblical passage from Psalm. I look unto the hills, from whence cometh my help. But of course, we get quite a bit from Houston, too.
Hey, Houston Falcon, how do you read on box?
Okay, loud and clear, Dave, and your go for liftoff. Good liftoff. Automatic.
To the strains of a military band, it was up, up and away before Apollo jettisoned a satellite that would send information from space long after the crew returned.
Tally-ho. And Houston 15, as we leave and look back, why, I guess we still have the impression the moon is mostly gray. However, when you're up, son, it does definitely take on a chocolate brown color.
Around the moon, Apollo gathered scientific data from instruments in the equipment section. Halfway back to Earth, astronaut Warden left the craft to retrieve the cassettes carrying this vital data.
We perfectly clear. We copy your report, Al. Thank you.
Plunging through the atmosphere at more than 25,000 miles an hour, 15's capsule, slowed by friction, returned with a treasure store of rocks and dust collected from nearly 20 hours on 3 moonwalks. But all was nearly lost when a parachute line snapped due to corrosive fuel, which was jettisoned from the descending capsule. Falling faster than planned, the astronauts received a nasty jolt. Had another chute failed, it could have cost their lives. The mission began the most productive stage of Apollo exploration, just when government backing reached an all-time low. Yet the samples unfurled a dramatic story of moon history, long before the earliest records on Earth.
All engines running. Launch commit. We have a liftoff.
We have a launch commit and we have a liftoff. We've cleared the tower.
April 72, and Apollo 16 blasts into space for a rendezvous with the moon 3 days later. On board, John Young chalked up his 4th flight into space.
Well, Houston, Fleet 16 has arrived.
Roger, 16. Copy, loud and clear.
Repeat again, we're go for landing.
Looks like we're going to be able to make it, John. There's not too many blocks up there.
Ryan, you're good. Okay, there we go, John. It's on the ground, Houston. Outstanding. There you go. Let's pick this baby up and turn it around. Okay? Makes you proud to be an American, Tony.
Unpacking the equipment, Young and Duke prepared for a drive on the lunar surface. First, a Grand Prix with a difference. Even the most meticulous plans can be disrupted within seconds by a clumsy moonwalker. John Young plowed up a cable carefully laid down to carry information from an intricate heat flow experiment.
With the RTG package, Charlie, what? Something happened here. What happened? I don't know. There's a line that pulled loose. Oh. What line is it? That's the heat flow. You pulled it off. I don't know how that happened.
So we understand that the cable came off of the connector and we've got just a free end of the cable, is that right?
That's right. Okay, the LSM is on the surface. I'm on deploy central station.
Okay.
We're stopped. We're just about directly north of the LSM. Man, Tony, you don't know how much fun this has been. Why, Houston, the beauty of this place is absolutely incredible. Okay, I'm going to park the rover, Houston. I think we got everything out of it there is to get, okay?
Okay, it sounds good. We think so too. Right.
Doing just like old 97, really moving down the track.
Roger.
The view is just beautiful.
December 1972, and the final Apollo moon flight presented a spectacle for space watchers along the Florida coastline. It was to be the best of them all, a fitting departure for a long last look.
Final guidance release. We'll expect engine ignition at 8.9 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, ignition sequence started. All engines are started. We have ignition. 2, 1, 0. We have a liftoff. We have a liftoff, and it's lighting up the area. It's just like daylight here at the Kennedy Space Center.
adjust around our things as we pitch back into LOI attitude. Lo and behold, from over the top of the lamp came the Earth. Put the whole thing in one big package. Hey, I just saw a flash on the lunar surface.
Oh, yeah?
They were just right out there north of Grimaldi. 40 feet, going down at 3. Stand by for touchdown. Stand by. Feels good. 20 feet. Going down at 2. 10 feet. 10 feet. Contact. Okay, Houston, the Challenger has landed.
What's your Challenger?
Moving quickly to clear the field for a geology trip, Cernan and Schmidt drilled holes for a heat flow experiment designed to take the moon's temperature. But getting things in is sometimes easier than getting them out, and once in a while you just had to take whatever help was offered.
Complete. I'm gonna get this thing out now that I got it.
Boys, you know, that's what you call getting down into your work.
The astronauts gave the roving car a workout that battered wheels and dust guards beyond design limits. Not surprisingly, a wheel guard broke, showering the crew with dust. That meant a fix-it job on the spot, a very long way from the nearest service station. Like good tourists, they used old maps held fast by a telescope clamp and went on their way. Rolling boulders down a dusty slope educated scientists in the binding properties of moon soil. The astronauts did it for fun.
Well, I know. I gotta look around a little more. It sure is not Trident. Yes, sir. You're pretty agile there, Twinkle Toes. You bet your life I am. Hey! Wait a minute. What? Where are the reflections? I've been fooled once. There is orange soil. Well, don't move it till I see it. Orange? I've got to dig a trench, Houston.
Copy that. I guess we better work fast.
It really is. Fantastic, sports fans.
Cavorting across the surface, two very happy astronauts were having a ball.
Rolling on the moon one day in the merry, merry month of December. Now, May's the month. May, that's right. May is the year of the month. When, much to my surprise, a pair of bunny eyes, we shall return with peace and in hope for all mankind. Godspeed, the crew of Apollo 17.
From Mission Control, the cheering echoed throughout NASA. In 3.5 spectacular years, 6 missions had carried 18 men and returned them safely, with 835 pounds of moon rock and new perspectives on the history of the solar system. The accomplishments had been enormous, and scientists would study the trophies for a decade. Started by John Kennedy in 1961, the race to the moon had not been won for Americans alone, but for all mankind. Yet even as the consoles were being switched off, a new age was about to dawn.
I'm proud to be a proud NASA. I'm very proud to be a captain in the Navy. And most of all, I'm proud to be American.
In the year Apollo moon flights ended, French rocket engineers made a commitment to build a European launcher, It was called Ariane. From inside a clamshell fairing jettisoned in space, satellites could be placed around Earth to serve a growing number of paying customers, looking to the benefits of a productive space program. Just what those benefits were would become apparent in the decade of the 70s. Ariane was developed to put payloads high above Earth where they would keep pace with the spinning surface and provide a continuous 24-hour service. The Japanese took a similar initiative, and NASDA, the National Space Development Agency, was set up to help boost Japan's expanding industries. The first Japanese launcher had a helping hand from American industry. Called the N series, it would carry satellites into orbit for communication and weather forecasting, and as a bow to their peaceful intent, each spacecraft would be named after a flower. The astonishing growth in satellite application during the 1970s gave birth to a revolution in communications that swept the world, bringing remote regions into contact with each other for the first time.
Hello? Yogendra?
Nag-iba na ba? Maigi naman yata yan. Inaasahan kong mabuti naman ang kalagayan ng
All manner of information would be carried on electromagnetic waves coursing through space to a satellite 22,000 miles above Earth. Hanging in orbit a tenth of the way to the moon, they link machines with messages from teleprinters and newspaper terminals, sending computer data halfway round the world and all the way back again. Eager to promote the new capacity for linking distant continents, presidents, prime ministers, and broadcasters spoke to each other through the TV satellites, gathering an audience of millions where once they spoke to a few. The phenomenal expansion of human chatter was spurred further by the Intelsat organization, a gathering of more than 100 countries which would collectively pay for advanced communications. First launched in 1980, a series of Intelsat 5 satellites will carry telephone traffic for much of the decade, until replaced by even more advanced models by the 1990s. Each Intelsat 5 can carry more than 12,000 simultaneous telephone conversations, or beam to the ground several television programs, live or on video. When men first set foot on the moon in 1969, each Intelsat would carry only 1,500 telephone calls, and the first global service had only just begun. Now, Intelsat 6 satellites are planned, each carrying more than 32,000 calls. By the early 1990s, about 10 will be in space to handle the ever-increasing demand for more capacity. Demand has already cut the costs of a telephone call to 1/10 the price it would be without satellites. For the 1980s, that capacity is provided by the Intelsat 5 family and made available to 108 countries on Earth for a fraction of the cost of a ground-based network. Launched by an Atlas rocket, Intelsat 5 unfolds in space to serve people in wealthy and not-so-wealthy countries throughout the developing world. And where nations plan effectively to reap the benefits of technology, communication is the key. But satellites that bring people closer through routine access to a telephone also help reach children in remote and half-forgotten places where education is a struggle. Television signals sent through space bring direct contact between schools and centers of learning, helping teachers wherever they may be. Better use of water resources and farmland, more efficient management of poor soils and agricultural development throughout the Third World hinges on the ability to teach precious skills. Crop production depends on information being distributed and then put to good use, through whatever means it can. Indonesia set the trend and launched its first satellite on an American rocket in 1976, linking 5,000 separate island communities. In this way, people everywhere talk through machines that break the barriers of language. Children are the first to use these new tools for a better way of understanding the world. On a planet stretched by diminishing resources, insufficient food for a quarter of the world's population, and a need to develop more farmland, mismanagement of the Earth has reached epidemic proportions. Millions of children starve to death each year because the world has no place for poverty. The abuse of the planet goes on, and soon it might be too late. As caretaker of a fragile planet, Landsat patrols the Earth from a polar orbit in space, generating pictures to spot pollution, effluent, and the foul products of industrial societies. A nodding mirror casts a reflective eye and sends to the ground images that track man's destruction of the Earth. With information like this, the countdown to extinction can be reversed. If caught in time, the planet will survive, and the growth of human populations become a sign of progress. Today, it is a symbol of failure and will only improve through the better use of technology working with nature and not against it. To make technology work in the best interests of the planet, images sent from space designate specific zones under threat from disease or poor land management. Infrared pictures pick out important defects in crop health and show changes to land and water. Matched with aerial pictures of the ground, digital images from space give operators the key to where fertilizers are needed in the fields. Landsat is a global resource in itself, and infrared pictures of a lakeside town pick out industrial pollution of water and atmosphere, pinpointing the guilty source. Pollution of the atmosphere and industrial chemicals released into the air are easily traced from space, helping lawmakers to prohibit factory owners from ignoring environmental rules and shore-based industries from killing the living streams. Designed to see the Earth as a complex, living organism, Landsat is a powerful protector of the ecosphere. When man turns his back on the environment and fails to live in harmony with nature, the consequences are far-reaching. But the multi-layered images from bigger and better Landsats are building a defense against abuse. Floods that wash away farmland and insects that destroy crops are plagues that Landsat is designed to monitor. And when drought strikes or a desert lays waste the sparse food and water resources used by nomadic tribes, pictures from an Earth-scanning satellite locate new places to settle. Most new minerals are first seen in satellite pictures that give precise information on the size of the field and help engineers balance industrial and environmental needs with those of the community. The Earth's most precious resource is water, that all too frequently dries up, cutting food production and creating famine. The fight for survival has a new weapon with the caretaker satellite working for everyone, everywhere. From a European weather satellite far out in space comes information vital for storm warnings that regularly save many lives in tropical zones where natural disasters are commonplace. One of the oldest sciences on Earth, meteorology is limited without technology. Now, tracking stations receive pictures of an entire hemisphere, showing weather patterns across millions of square miles. Indexed and distributed around the globe, often by the satellites themselves, information on hurricanes, typhoons, rain and snowfall helps people defend their lives and property. The view from space tells weathermen temperatures at the top and the bottom of the atmosphere, of cloud patterns and areas of increasing pressure. And new instruments flying in the latest spacecraft record moisture levels and pick out rain showers moving across the globe. Like their Landsat counterparts, weather satellites patrol the planet, measuring details about the atmosphere and building a resource vital for better management of Earth and all its living things. It is an indispensable tool in the fight for survival. Earth and space meet at the atmosphere's edge, and just above the planet's thin blue veil, observatories scan the universe. From the ground, Earth's atmosphere obscures the view that airless space provides, and massive telescopes must compensate for this distortion to study and understand the powerful forces that sustain life. The sun is a vital link in our weather chain, and careful observation of solar flares the size of Earth helps us better understand the planet itself. By understanding the solar system, the Earth's balance of natural and artificial resources can be more meaningfully interpreted, allowing man to know where nature puts a limit on human intervention. The exploration of the solar system is an essential part of husbanding our planet in a more intelligent way. Scientists believe the solar system formed from gas and dust in a galaxy of 100 billion stars. Soon, a hot core at the center gave birth to a protostar, the Sun. Planets formed from rocks and boulders left over at the Sun's birth, now a star in its own right, shining with life-giving energy. The primitive planets were bombarded with debris from the solar system, gouging out basins and huge craters on the surface. Closest to the Sun, Mercury was to be visited from a spacecraft called Mariner 10, launched in 1973 for a flyby with a barren planet. But Venus, second out from the Sun, was to get an even closer inspection from two spacecraft, one American, the other Russian. In an almost parallel race to gather the most information, the two countries prepared probes to penetrate the atmosphere and land on the surface of this alien and inhospitable planet. Special care was needed to make the heat shields in which the probes could survive in an atmosphere where ground temperatures are more than 800 degrees Fahrenheit and pressures are 90 times that at the surface of the Earth. Insulated from the heat, scientific instruments would monitor conditions on Venus and record the hostile environment where no life could exist. The American probes were not built to survive on the surface, but the Russian lander was designed to operate for several hours and send back pictures, showing for the first time what cloud-shrouded Venus was really like. Lowered by parachutes, the capsules made an extraordinary journey through sulfur lakes and dense carbon dioxide clouds. Free falling to a surface so hot that lead would run in rivers of fire, the capsules survived. What Russia's lander saw was an astonishing display of heat-cracked rock and volcanic boulders, unlike anything elsewhere in the solar system, an inferno of gas and fumes. And all the time, another American spacecraft mapped the swirling clouds above and charted the weather patterns that tore around the planet more than 50 times faster than Venus rotated on its axis. It was an atmosphere quite different to Earth's jeweled oasis. Water and a comfortable atmosphere were not the characteristics found on other planets, but Mars held hope that here robots from Earth might find primitive living things. It's a dim hope that living organisms might yet appear on this strange world and grow to resemble life on Earth 3 billion years ago. But they may have appeared already and be in so simple a form that we cannot even understand where they are or what they look like. The dream of an Earth-like world is gone. Only barren deserts and rocky ravines break the monotony of a cratered surface. The most ambitious robot lander ever sent to the planets was NASA's Viking spacecraft. Its very special purpose, to find out if life had evolved on Mars. Viking was protected by a shell designed to split apart and set the lander free. It would be launched by a mighty Titan rocket, built from elements of a ballistic missile of the type that once carried 12 Gemini capsules into space. Carried by a spacecraft that stayed in orbit around Mars, the Viking lander's touchdown spot was decided by a careful study of photographs sent back to Earth. There were many dangers at the surface and 1 million rocks to break a robot's leg. A very large library of photographs provided by this and earlier flights helped build the references from which a suitable landing place could be chosen. Assembled on a globe, they gave incredible detail to this picture pattern of Mars and served to aid scientists plan new tasks for Viking. When at last a suitable spot was found, the Viking prepared to land, separating from the orbiter, but still inside its shell. As the capsule drifted toward Mars, the shell divided. Slowed by friction with the atmosphere and parachutes deployed on the way down, rocket motors took over and lowered the lander to the surface. Desolation faced the cameras with no obvious sign of life. But an arm with a scoop would dig the dust and pick small pebbles for analysis in an experiment designed to see if tiny living things were there after all, shaken through a funnel and taken by conveyor belt to chambers inside Viking. What scientists saw resembled life seen in some soils on Earth, but they could find no physical sign. If life was there, the bugs were consuming their own bodies. Was it a germ totally alien to machines from Earth? Nobody knows, but there is nothing like it anywhere on this planet. Beyond Mars, a rocky belt of asteroids and boulders separates the 4 inner planets from huge giants beyond, worlds 1,000 times the size of Earth. To probe these distant regions of the solar system, NASA launched Pioneer and Voyager spacecraft to chart the colder corridors of interplanetary space and photograph the colored bands of Jupiter. Occasionally, a moon or two drifts by. There are numerous moons around this enormous ball of gas, each locked to the gravity of the solar system's biggest planet. A psychedelic montage of sounds from Earth was carried on a disc attached to Voyager. Messages to unidentified aliens encountered on the way. And then it's Callisto's turn, peppered with 1 million tiny craters and speckles of shining frost. giant Jupiter is the star attraction. The great red spot, so large 3 worlds the size of Earth could float inside. Almost twice as far from the Sun, Saturn's beauty dominates Jupiter's size. A gaseous world ringed with enigmatic bands and more than 20 escorting moons. Clustered particles form the main rings, but Voyager's camera sees a finger spread of moving bands, tiny particles suspended just above the main rings by magnetic forces from the center of the planet, defying the main streams to stand apart from the crowd. Instruments scan the rings, studying the myriad particles that orbit Saturn in a remorseless convoy of ice chips. A billion miles past Saturn, Voyager takes a look at Uranus, a planet tilted on its side and circled by a few thin rings. And sometime in 1989, if it survives, Voyager flies past Neptune and moves on to one of its moons. Pioneer and Voyager are leaving the solar system to reach other stars a million years from now. They carry messages from planet Earth to tell the citizens of alien worlds where they came from all those millions of years ago. By then, the Earth will be a frozen remnant in a dead solar system. Is there anybody out there to know or even care?
stages switching now to internal power. All propellant tanks being pressurized. T-minus 20 seconds. And the countdown continues to go smoothly. Guidance release. T-minus 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8. We have ignition sequence has started. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. And we have a liftoff.
With the power of 1,000 racing cars, Skylab thundered toward space in May 1973. Its mission? To explore the Earth.
Still some doubt in the minds of flight controllers here in Mission Control as to whether the main solar panels on the workshop.
Skylab was the refitted third stage of a massive Saturn V, the central part serving as a workshop. Solar panels providing electricity for running the station, one panel each side of the workshop, and 4 wing-shaped arrays for experiments. When Houston got word a solar wing had been ripped off during launch, a special umbrella was made to protect the workshop hull, exposed by a sun shield that also came off. Now Skylab astronauts would have to fly a rescue mission to save the crippled space station from heating up in the scorching sun and running out of power. Controllers soon learned the other solar wing had been snagged by debris when the first panel tore loose, so without a helping hand, that too would be unusable.
T-minus 17 seconds and counting. T-minus 15. At T-minus 3.1 seconds, we'll expect the engine sequence to start on the vehicle. T-minus 7, 6, 5, 4, 3. Engine sequence start. 2, 1, 0.
10 days late and packed out with sunshades, giant scissors, and a tool chest the envy of a motor mechanic, Conrad, Weitz, and Kerwin rode a Saturn 1B to the limping laboratory with an exhilarating call from the commander.
All right, Houston, Skylab 2. We fix anything. I got a pitch and a roll program. Solar Wing 1 is in fact partially deployed, and the reason that you've got different readings, not symmetric between your 3 solar panels, is there's a bulge of meteorite shield underneath it in the middle, and it looks to be holding it down.
At last contact over the Vanguard tracking station, the crew of Skylab 2 was having difficulty in redocking. They'd made several attempts and were going down through the backup procedures for retracting in and extending the...
Finding it difficult to dock after a quick fly-round inspection, the Apollo capsule pulled back, viewing the long solar wing pinned down against the workshop hull.
Control system thrusters, whereas they had been only on 2-jet thrusting during the stand-up EVA to prevent the RCS plume from striking the pilot as he stood in the hatch.
Alright, Houston through the Vanguard. How do you read?
You got a hard dock out of it.
Hey, way to go!
With a cry of success, Skylab's rescue crew moved inside. Temperatures were over 100 degrees, and the food freezers were near to collapse in the sweltering heat. First priority was to maneuver the sunshade through an airlock in the workshop wall. Then, with consummate skill, Conrad and Weitz pulled free the one remaining solar wing. putting electrical power aboard Skylab. Two days after launch, Skylab had been repaired. It was a 100-ton hotel with as much room as a 3-story house, enough food for 6 months in space, and a view literally out of this world.
I'm not convinced that this is all motion sickness either.
Medical tests and dental checks, measurements of respiration and heart rate, all vital to the healthy condition of a Skylab astronaut. Keeping fit was essential and amusing. And in space, it seemed, you could perform incredible feats of human strength, or so it looked. But where the only barber was a fellow astronaut, it sometimes paid to keep your hat on. And as for the shower, at least that got a guy away from the kitchen.
Meal right now, and it looks like we'll probably be working around for another hour or so. We've had to move extremely slowly to
Now astronauts could linger on fascinating experiments involving blood samples, gyroscopes, oscillating springs, and machines to measure the weight of a weightless object.
So we tend to be fairly careful how we move.
The command module for some picture taking, but our friend Arabella did some good work last night. She's got very unusual webs spun around all the 4 corners of the box with some stringers even from corner to corner, so she had to do a lot of improvising.
To practice working in space, Skylab astronauts flew a special maneuvering unit built to move them about from one place to another. Propelled by tiny nitrogen thrusters, the backpack gave a glimpse of the future when shuttle crews would freely move around outside their space vehicles.
And the crew aboard Skylab continuing to direct most of their activities toward observing the sun, where early this morning there was a very large solar flare, described by Commander Al Bean as the Big Daddy, and by scientists here in Mission Control Center as the brightest and largest solar flare in the past year. Covered an area 10 times as large as the planet Earth, and occurred in active region 9 on the sun's southwest quadrant.
A more down-to-earth science, backed up by pictures from the Landsat spacecraft, viewed the ground for the biggest inventory of the world ever made. Water pollution, the movement of fish shoals, shifting sands in a river estuary, mixed the science of the sea with the search for tropical storms above the raging ocean. From its vantage point in space between May 73 and February 74, Skylab peered into the man-made problems on a threatened planet. America and Russia signed a historic agreement to shake hands in space, and Brezhnev and Nixon met to seal the plan. It was a unique occasion. In Moscow, teams of American engineers, scientists, and astronauts met with their Soviet counterparts. A Soyuz was being prepared for an act of cooperation unimagined when the moon race forged a spirit of unbridled competition. Deke Slayton failed to make it first time round, but would fly aboard Apollo to dock with Soyuz in orbit. Alexei Leonov, the first to walk in space, would command the Soviet ship. Apollo-Soyuz brought cosmonaut and astronaut together professionally for the first time, and for a while, fettered pride evaporated in the struggle against common danger. Essentially a Soviet design, the docking unit was very different to Apollo equipment, and the first of its kind.
Onboard control systems have completed the registration equipment here. Ignition. The power.
In 1966, only months after 3 Americans were killed in a launch pad fire, cosmonaut Komarov died when Soyuz 1 crashed uncontrollably to Earth. 5 years later, 3 Russians died aboard Soyuz 11 when their capsule depressurized in space. The Soviets took special precautions and turned a 3-man spacecraft into a 2-man capsule with spacesuits for both where previously they had none.
40 seconds, the flight is normal.
In June 75, Soyuz, carrying Leonov and Kubasov, roared into orbit, there to reside and wait for an Apollo capsule carrying Stafford, Slayton, and Brand. It would be the last flight of Apollo, the last launch of a Saturn rocket, and the last NASA-manned mission to splash down in water. Not for nearly 6 years would another American astronaut fly into orbit. In the control room at Houston, they received confirmation that Soyuz was safely in space. At the launch control site in Florida, everything was ready.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, engine on, start, 0.
2 days later, Apollo met Soyuz nearly 200 miles above Earth.
Have you got a good view of him, Ben? Apollo, Houston, I got 2 messages for you. Moscow is go for docking. Houston is go for docking. It's up to you guys. Have fun.
All righty, sounds good.
For more than 14 years, the 2 most powerful nations on Earth had challenged each other in space. Now, they would unite.
Present you with 5 flags for your government and the people of the Soviet Union.
Joined docked spacecrafts Apollo and Soyuz with the 2 U.S. and USSR flags side by side.
When they said goodbye nearly 48 hours later, it was the end of what many had hoped could be a new age of cooperation. With 2 great powers marching together into the cosmos. That was not to be. Soyuz returned after 6 days in space. Apollo stayed 3 days more and then came home. On the way down, jettisoned fuel got into the capsule and almost poisoned the crew. They landed upside down in the Pacific. but not for long.
Hatch is open. Package containing the film or the experiments handed out. The back's open. There's the other one. We don't know which was which. The astronaut.
Russia's manned space program would ride on the fortunes of one major project, a laboratory called Salyut. With automatic rendezvous and docking equipment, Soyuz would fly teams of cosmonauts to work aboard Salyut for months on end. Much smaller than Skylab, occupied by NASA astronauts in '73, it would last much longer, each Salyut giving up to 5 years' service before replacement by another of the same type. Between Apollo-Soyuz and the start of America's shuttle flights, Russian cosmonauts would fly 22 missions to Salyuts in orbit and put teams in space for 6 months at a time. From a TV camera mounted outside Soyuz, a Salyut space station looms into view, its huge antenna dominating the front end. Within seconds, docking is completed. Orbiting the planet with an almost continuous presence of man in space, Salyut served military and domestic functions, testing new equipment and making a comprehensive survey of Soviet territory. Salyut would be home for 2 men at a time, only occasionally going outside to repair or service the orbiting laboratory. And getting inside the suit was a case of using the back entrance and working your way through to the front. Cosmonauts used an airlock to move outside without depressurizing the interior of the main station, frequently taking with them cameras wrapped in covers to protect delicate parts from the sun's rays. Several times, the Salyut cosmonauts went outside to conduct scientific experiments, effect minor repairs, replace worn-out equipment, or inspect the exterior. By the late 1970s, a regular pattern of Soyuz missions took cosmonauts into space, with men from East European and other pro-Soviet countries carried on short trips to visit the long-stay occupants aboard Salyut. New, modified control equipment was built, and an air of expanding commitment filtered through. The Russians were in space to stay. Using contour couches moved through the station from one Soyuz to another, cosmonauts on short visits left their new capsule for the long-stay crew and went home in the older spacecraft. Even the personalized suits were moved from a Soyuz at one end to a Soyuz at the other. The most astonishing saga of all was the record of Salyut 6. It was occupied on and off for almost 4 years. In that time, 19 Soyuz capsules were launched, and very long missions gave a wealth of data on the physical effects of weightlessness. Before Salyut 6, the flight duration record was the 84-day Skylab mission, which ended February 74. Redesigned Soyuz capsules packed out with food, fuel, and provisions instead of cosmonauts, and called Progress supply ships, were sent to restock the stations. Salyut 6 alone received 12 Progress types, keeping it operational far beyond the life of supplies carried at launch. Ferry ships bringing essential equipment doubled as mail carriers for homesick cosmonauts, and even a guitar or two was known to get smuggled aboard. Letters from loved ones and music tapes from the Bolshoi shared room with fuel tanks and dehydrated food. In March 78, the world's first international manned space mission carried a Czech cosmonaut to visit Romanenko and Grechko aboard Salyut. In the next 4 years, men from Poland, East Germany, Bulgaria, Hungary, Vietnam, Cuba, Mongolia, Romania, and France made a similar trip to Salyut 6 and its successor. Setting up the world's first unofficial post office in space, the cosmonauts returned with unique mementos of an exceptional journey. Exercise kept cosmonauts in physical trim, and all the rules of the fitness game that worked aboard America's Skylab applied equally to Russia's long-duration flights. On some missions, 2 hours a day on exercise was a vital part of staying in condition. And a vital part of getting on with a fellow pilot was to take a shower as often as the cramped conditions would allow. The land, agriculture, and coastal resources of the Soviet Union gained measurably from the surveillance role of Salyut, providing regular observations of remote areas. The routine flights provide a consistent development for Russian space technology, and long-duration missions look ahead to the day Soviet cosmonauts will head for Mars, a journey that would last at least 7 months. As cosmonauts on long flights return home, the stresses of re-entry put great strain on the human body. Conditions on the ground are not always favorable to a good recovery, and there is always uncertainty about the pilot's condition. To guard against physical injury or harm easily caused to a cosmonaut back from several months in space, caution prevails, and the pilot is gently lowered to the ground. It is speculation about the limits to human endurance which makes each long-duration flight a new chapter in the annals of physiology, turning each mission into a pioneering endeavor at the frontier of human knowledge. From the Johnson Space Center at Houston, NASA abandoned the old dinosaurs of the space age to set its sights far beyond the limits of present technology. The huge rockets of yesteryear no longer had a mission. Capsules like Apollo were now showpieces in a museum. A new age was about to dawn. The shuttle would be its cornerstone. For 10 years, Rockwell and a host of subcontractors labored to build the world's first reusable spacecraft, a winged rocket to fly back down from orbit and land like an aeroplane. Carried on top of a Boeing 747, the shuttle would first flex its wings in the atmosphere, proving it could fly like a glider and gently return to Earth under full control. It was a very far cry from the tiny Apollo capsule, yet could sit comfortably on the floor of the shuttle's cabin.
Okay, all operators, go for takeoff. GNC, go. Fido, go. Arrow, go. Loki, go. Network, go. Inco, go. FAO, go. Homer, go. AMR, go. Rockwell, go. Roger, Roger, we're go for takeoff. Flaps coming to 5.
Okay, Enterprise is set. Next to left, that's. And we'll stand by for the bang, Gordo. Not too bad, no. Yeah, okay, she's flying good. Okay, he's starting to turn now. Right. Enterprise, you're clear to start to turn. Okay, starting to turn the final. You got to. Straighten her up, Gordo, not quite straight. Okay. Slightly low. Okay. Stop her here a minute. Yeah, we ought to be turning at 7-8. Have to look for position. Okay. Okay, we are armed and clear. Standing by the gear. Okay, the gear is coming down at 270. Coming down, mark. Gear coming. Okay, 3 downs. Gear's down. 240. 230. 220, lots of speed. Beautiful. 210. 200. 195. And the speed brakes are coming. Okay, 60 knots. Try the nose wheel. Okay. That was too good a glider. Picture book flight, wasn't it? Congratulations, boy. Thank you.
To fly into space, the shuttle needed rocket motors a lot more efficient than engines used to put Apollo on the moon. With new ways of making special parts, engineers developed innovative ideas for a motor that had to fire again and again and again. Shuttle engines would be throttled up and down and last for at least 50 missions. No one had built rocket motors to do that before. Heat-protective tiles built to last at least 100 flights would insulate the metal skin from high temperatures on re-entry. Made from a silica fiber, they were quite unlike ablative shields designed to burn slowly. Tiles would simply glow and last a very long time. John Young and Bob Crippen were chosen to fly the first shuttle, as much a pioneering mission as the first Mercury flight had been 20 years earlier. Because the shuttle would carry toxic fuels, a quick means of emergency escape might pay off in a minor accident involving the crew. And even a rope was better than clumsy ladders in situations where time was of the essence. New ways of doing things in space, made possible through the remarkable qualities of this spacecraft, meant training took on a special purpose. All the old familiar routines were still an essential part of crew preparation, but with 30 or 40 flights each year, the astronaut office would soon become a production line for pilots. Gone were the days when team members trained exclusively for one mission. Now, with a comprehensive background schedule, astronauts would be prepared for a standard shuttle flight and spend only a few months training for specific tasks on a particular mission. Simulated weightlessness helped familiarize astronauts with new equipment. Pilots would only carry suits along for emergency if the cabin sprang a leak, or if they needed to go outside. Tailored suits were a thing of the past, and a new set of interchangeable torsos and limb segments fitted all sizes. Crew simulators took on the appearance of an aeroplane flight deck, signaling the new age of reusable space transportation. And because the spaceplane had wings, practice now included landings in standard jet trainers. Space Shuttle Columbia was towed from its hangar to the giant assembly building, and all across the Cape, technicians and engineers groomed elements of America's new space program. At launch, the shuttle would weigh 2,000 tons and leap towards space with the power of 200 million horses. It was a marriage of the rocket and the aeroplane that many had thought would be the way men first went into space. Now, picking up the challenge of a true spaceplane set by Scott Crossfield in the X-15 2 decades before, American astronauts were going back into orbit. Bob Crippen joined the astronaut team in 1969. His commander, John Young, had been in space 4 times. Their special suits would protect them if they ejected on the way up or down, different from the spacesuits carried on later flights. In the pre-dawn hours of April 12, 1981, 20 years on from the day Yuri Gagarin became the first man in space, Young and Crippen rode a bus to Launch Complex 39, where a space plane stood waiting.
The firing system for the sound suppression water will be armed.
And from their position high atop the launch pad, the two men got ready to fly the world's first shuttle.
Instrumentation recorders are on. We're just a few seconds away from switching to the redundant sense sequencer. T-minus 27 seconds. We have gone for redundant set sequencer start. T-minus 20 seconds and counting. T-minus 15, 14, 13, T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. We've gone for main engine start. We have main engine start.
Confirm solid rocket booster set. On-board guidance is converging as programmed. Columbia is now steering for its precise window in space for main engine cutoff. Standing by now for external tank separation. Roger, we confirm the SEP, Columbia. 9 minutes, 3 seconds. Confirm external tank separation. Columbia now performing an evasive maneuver, moving below and beyond and translating to the north of the external tank. Young should see it moving away out his window.
Columbia, Houston, your go for nominal ohms 1 and for APU shutdown on time.
Less than 9 minutes after liftoff, the shuttle was in space, with Crippen getting ready to stow unnecessary gear and open the payload bay doors. The cavernous bay was 60 feet long, the light graphite doors fitted with radiators for getting rid of excess heat, serving to protect cargo placed inside for launch. No sooner had the cameras turned on than controllers saw a few missing tiles on one of the engine pods, but they were in an area which would keep fairly cool on re-entry and pose no problem for the landing. The huge payload bay could carry up to 30 tons of cargo on later flights, but for the first, a package of instruments.
We're trying to put that on TV right now.
Roger, Crip, we can see that good.
And we're
Down below the flight deck, a spacious living area served as bathroom, toilet, exercise pad, and galley. And below that, a basement cellar for equipment and supplies.
CDR seat, and you might tell me how your reception is.
Okay, we've got a good picture, Crip.
All too soon, it was time to head for home and carry out the first glide re-entry with a winged vehicle flying at 25 times the speed of sound. The payload bay doors were shut, and 2 days into the mission, the shuttle got ready for its biggest test yet. They would soon know if those tiles worked.
Anyone ever expected to do on a first flight?
John and Crip, we're 30 seconds from LOS. Want to report that Columbia...
2 engines at the rear of the shuttle fired briefly to slow it enough for a long glide toward thin air, and then full deceleration in the denser atmosphere below.
The burn.
Mark, Mach 9 at 9,700 feet per second.
Columbia, you got perfect energy, perfect ground track.
Roger that.
And John, we're showing you rolling right. Looking good.
Normal roll.
Chase will be on time.
Okay.
Columbia, you're really looking good. Right on the money. Right on the money. Welcome home, Columbia. Beautiful, beautiful.
We'll stop.
This is Mission Control, Houston. The unofficial...
On its very first flight, everything had gone better than best hopes indicated it might. But there was still a lot to do, and many tasks to carry out to make it safe for the crew to emerge.
At least 26 more minutes on the ammonia. You're looking real good.
John Young led Crippen down the steps, the first Americans to walk away from a manned spacecraft.
Instructions were prepare for
For 12 years, 50,000 people had worked to make the shuttle a reality. Now 2 men had literally flown back from space, and a new window opened on an age of space, unlike anything yet seen. It was the beginning of at least 100 flights to come for the shuttle called Columbia, and for each of the remaining shuttles called Challenger, Discovery, and Atlantis.
We have main engine start. -3, 2, 1. We have ignition. We have ignition of the solid rocket boosters and liftoff. Liftoff of America's space shuttle. And the space shuttle has cleared the tower.
Houston now controlling. Mission control confirms roll maneuver started.
Columbia, Houston, you're going 40.
Roger, going 40. And master arm bandits. Everything in the payload...
On its second flight into space, Columbia carried a bionic arm and a TV camera to see the shuttle as only spacemen see it.
Okay, Sally, we've got the arm secured right now. We're just getting ready to activate the...
The arm itself signified the international nature of the new space age, and would be the means by which objects large and small could be moved in and out of the cargo bay.
Is out for the first time. She's been deployed, working great. We have done all the way through page 1-12, and we're sitting, waiting for the Surrey data tank to be over to get back into it and do the THC.
In test after test, the arm was put through its paces, and in mission after mission, the shuttle explored new corners of its performance envelope. On the third flight of Columbia, the astronauts carried a large pack of scientific instruments and tested new equipment to show the flexibility of the shuttle and its systems. Their flight concentrated on measuring the environment in the payload bay, photographing the Earth, and demonstrating several unique ways the shuttle could be used for better space operations in future. But one of the more exciting tasks involved the arm and a plasma package, built to look at the way Columbia interacted with the solar energy streaming past Earth's atmosphere. The fourth flight of Spaceship Columbia would be the last test mission.
We tried to activate the getaway and
Flight number 4 completed a series of shakedown missions, clearing the way for paying customers with commercial satellites. It carried equipment for the Pentagon, heralding a new age in which military and civilian users would both fly aboard the same bus into orbit. And the shuttle was a bus, designed for routine trucking operations, moving cargo off the Earth into space. With flights now on a regular schedule, shuttle astronauts could settle down to medical tests and exercise routines to see how the body behaved in space. It was like Skylab in miniature. When the fourth flight of Columbia came to an end, it sealed the future for shuttle. The next flight inaugurated an era of commercial opportunity.
2 minutes, 15 seconds. Confirmed solid rocket booster separation.
Designed to provide economic and affordable access to space, the shuttle is based on reusing as much as possible after each mission. The big boosters lifting shuttle on its way are jettisoned on the way up and recovered for use on a later flight. In this way, costs are kept down to help lower fees charged for launching satellites. Only the big external propellant tank is thrown away on each flight, tossed into the ocean where it breaks up harmlessly. Recovery costs work out more expensive than production, so here too the shuttle is economical. The fifth flight took 4 men up for the first time, but its purpose was to deploy 2 satellites, one for Canada and one for Indonesia, shuttle's first commercial payload.
Santiago AOS is 8:11:02. We're looking forward to a good deploy report. Everything looks right on the money to us down here right now.
Set spinning for stability, each satellite was held by clamps to a special table. Just at the correct place in orbit round the Earth, the astronauts set instruments to launch the satellite. Traveling at 5 miles a second, their timing was crucial. At the precise moment, 3 little springs pushed the satellite free. It was as simple as that, but a beautiful sight for all aboard Columbia.
We got SBS off time, and if you're interested, I'll read you the pad.
Roger, go ahead.
Okay, current attitude, 24.19er, 87.41, 292.65, errors, plus 0.08, minus 0.08.
We have main engine ignition.
Proving that what goes up need never come down, 2 empty places for satellites now in orbit. But the mission did have some failures. 2 malfunctioning spacesuits prevented a planned spacewalk, a legacy for the 6th mission, the first flight of NASA's second shuttle called Challenger.
Houston, copies, Challenger.
The period of maximum aerodynamic pressure.
Launched 2 years to the day after Columbia's first flight, Challenger gave 4 men a ride and a spacewalk for 2 along a very precarious handrail.
Touchdown time at 5 days, 0 hours, 23 minutes, 42 seconds.
Running to keep up with a male-orientated job, astronaut Sally Ride would become the first American lady to fly in space. Russia launched its second woman cosmonaut just before the 5th shuttle flight. But Sally would fly with 4 men on a flight to launch satellites and stretch the bionic arm in a demonstration of how it could capture and retrieve satellites already in space. With fittings for her space hat and training that made no concessions, Sally had to do everything the guys did and more. Training was always strenuous, and the less physically strong just had to work harder. Ejection seats had been removed from the shuttle after Columbia's 4th flight, but if it ditched at sea, shuttle would make a terrible boat. Water survival was essential. And weightless training was a great equalizer. Central to the success of Shuttle's 7th mission was the huge arm that would grapple a German satellite back in the payload bay after first deploying it in space.
7, 6, we go for main engine start. We have main engine start. And ignition and liftoff. Liftoff of NCS-7 and America's first
woman astronaut, and the shuttle has cleared the tower. Roll program.
Roger your roll, Challenger.
Houston now controlling. Mission control confirms roll maneuver started.
Ground com on all S channels 217, 218.
20 seconds. Thrust looks good. 25 seconds. Roll maneuver completed. Challenger 21 nautical miles in altitude. Standing by now for solid rocket booster separation. 12 minutes, 12 seconds. Confirm good solid rocket booster separation. The booster's falling away now.
Challenger Houston, your go for nominal ohms 1. APU shut down on time.
Roger that.
Commanded by Bob Crippen, the flight was the first to carry 5 people into space, and Sally was in her element. A quick burst from a rocket motor sent a shiver through Challenger, the camera bouncing in its bracket.
Roger, we copy, and you all look good.
Also on hand, a pharmaceutical test rack for the new vaccines promised from space manufacturing plants.
Roger, and we'll have you for about 2 more.
Yargety's next at 1+4 seconds.
Even on board, Sally was still running, but not to catch up.
Roger, you might check the camera over.
Roger, we understand. We saw some good views of the Earth through your cameras.
And the candy bar did taste very good, even on the jog.
Wonderful, wonderful.
And the mass spec is...
But sometimes the most sociable astronaut needed moments of privacy, a modesty not seen on earlier flights. Now it was time to put out the German satellite, fly off, come back, and retrieve it for return to base.
And TJ, we just turned on the mass spec to...
The operation was a dazzling success and revealed new fields in which the shuttle could best provide its services to man. With a myriad escorting satellites relaying communication, storm warnings, and a promise of better and more effective ways to manage the global garden, shuttle could become custodian of a better world. Space fills the needs of man, as countless lives saved by satellites now testify. If space can be a preserved arena for combat against common threats from pollution, malnutrition, starvation, and thirst, it will have served man very well. Man went to the moon not because of his technology, but because of his imagination. Denied that imagination, he cannot best deploy the technical resources here today for a better world in the future. The shuttle is the foundation on which that future rests.
That's outstanding, John. Thank you.
But there is a challenge to the use of space for man's welfare. Satellites also serve to threaten the very survival of mankind. every hour of every day, year in, year out, satellites control weapons whose use would unleash a colossal force of devastation unlike anything conceived by the natural world. Their purpose is to control forces of destruction when all human contact is lost, to prosecute total retribution from beyond the grave upon a host unable to save itself. On mobilization, Navstar would be the critical link through which information would be channeled for accurate targeting by weapons blinded in the electronic countermeasures of modern war. When the fighting starts, all control of land and sea forces will survive only through satellites in space, stretching the conflict and broadening the base of the battle. But all this is not inevitable. Built by a group of European countries, a laboratory designed to fit inside the shuttle will give scientists a new look at making things in space for people on Earth. To fill the shuttle's enormous cargo bay, Spacelab provides room for several scientists to work together. Astronauts will work in the laboratory to seek ways of preparing new medicines, growing semiconductor crystals for the electronics industry, and preparing new alloys. Spacelab will revolutionize the way we understand science. In the second half of the 1980s, a 20-ton telescope will be carried into space by the shuttle. With this instrument, observers will see 350 times the volume of space seen by the most powerful telescopes on the ground. New machines will fabricate structures and steelwork to build stations and bases in space. On each mission, beam builders with rolls of aluminium will fabricate girders a mile long, from which orbital Spidermen will construct huge platforms. From these, giant assemblies would grow to make solar power satellites, each generating the output of a nuclear power station on Earth. The fiction and fantasy of today will emerge in another century as the first space cities of a new cosmic age. In huge cigar-shaped colonies, Earthlings will create a world of wonder to rivet the imagination, renewing in space opportunities lost on planet Earth. beyond the limits of time, the Earth, the planets and the Sun will be left as a dim reminder of where it all began. Life itself will have outlived the solar system that gave it birth. The choices before man today are clear. He lives in ever-enriching harmony with the universe, or dies, forgotten on a wasted planet. It could be that this will be the end of man's story on Earth, for it will be the genesis of a new race, a man whose being extends into the furthest regions of the cosmos.